And hello, everyone. Welcome into another episode of Flyers Files on 97.3 ESPN. Kevin Durso, Flyers insider from 97.3 ESPN, here with you. Haley Taylor Simon is off tonight and this week, a little bit under the weather, so we're going to fly solo on this one for you. And the Flyers played 2 games since our last episode, Saturday at home ice against Boston, and then starting a 3-game road trip against the Carolina Hurricanes. And the Flyers take losses in both 3-0 to the Bruins and then a 6-4 loss to the Carolina Hurricanes on Tuesday night. And really 2 games that to this point, you look at all of the factors that go into it and some real just interesting things going on in both games. I think that the Boston game was really it was a struggle offensively. They get shut out 3-0, but the bigger story was Sam Ersson leaving the game. And I thought that Alexei Kolosov kind of flew under the radar in that game as having a better performance than maybe expected. He made 20 saves on 22 shots. That sounds really good from the backup netminder, and trying to figure out a way to get him going a little bit. But then you just see everything kind of creep up again in the Carolina game. Flyers finally start getting some offense. They score 4 goals in the game, but their defensive structure has really been a big problem for much of the season. It's not helped by the fact that Cam York is out with an injury. And you got guys who are trying to fill the void and trying to kind of make things work on the back end. The biggest struggle for this team has really been that they don't have the puck enough. This is a team that struggles to get out of their own zone, struggles to generate much of anything. So they need to have a game like they had on Tuesday in Carolina, where the puck just happens to find the net. They end up scoring 4 goals. They finish the game with 16 shots, though. It's not going to take care of what you need to take care of and help you get any better when you're moving along in this process as you try to build on last season's successes. It's a step backwards. And I think that that's a real concern at this point. And I'm not trying to kick off and make this whole episode kind of sort of a doom and gloom situation. But I mean, if you're headlining everything from start to start this show off this week, the Flyers woke up on Wednesday morning as the worst team in the league by points percentage. They've played 13 games. They have a 4-8-1 record, and they're tied with Nashville with 9 points, and that's at the bottom of the standings. And Nashville has 1 fewer game played. So they are the team that, if the season ended today, would have the best odds at the lottery ticket in the NHL draft. Now, that sounds significant for the Flyers being a team in a rebuild, but I think it almost comes out of order in a way, because if this was the Flyers last season, and it's very much the type of team I expected last season, they really surprised throughout the course of the season, obviously. If this is the Flyers of last season, then I think they're going through the decision-making process in a totally different way. I think that they would be looking at this roster and looking at the players that they have and not kind of being mesmerized by one good season or by guys playing over their heads a little bit more. And I'm thinking really of guys like Ryan Poehling, someone who comes to mind, and Poehling's dealing with an injury as well right now. So he was not on the road trip. He's on IR now. But Poehling's a guy who I think that last season did a lot more than expectations said. And because of that, the Flyers rewarded him. He had a great start to the season. He carried that through into midseason. As a result, the Flyers gave him a contract. And now, he's on the books for another season beyond this one. And you think about a guy, and I don't think, Garnet Hathaway's another guy I'd bring up, and I don't think that he's necessarily playing bad. It's a guy, though, who I think, do you need to give him the 2-year extension for purposes of taking advancement in being a better team skill-wise down the road? He's not going to be the guy who makes your team more skilled. He's got a role, and he plays the role well. But I look at somebody like him and I go, was the 2 years really necessary? The 2 years that hasn't kicked in, by the way. This is the last year of the original contract he signed. So you start to ask yourself that question. And there's an element where it's still early in the season, but it's not impossible to look at the Flyers at the bottom of the standings right now and say, you're playing Tampa Bay on Thursday. You're playing Florida on Saturday. You've got a really kind of, in a way, a riveting matchup against San Jose on Monday, because it's 2 teams toward the bottom. It very well could be an early test to see who is more likely to finish in that spot, versus a turnaround of some kind. They're like, it's too early to just sit here and go, well, this is what the Flyers are, and that's the end of the season. 13 games in is not the time to necessarily do that, but it is time to start showing concern about, Is this what they really are? And I think that there are certain guys who you can get excited about still and see what the benefit is that they provide. There was a lot of conversation about Travis Konechny and the contract extension he was going to get. I think the Travis Konechny conversation is one that, if you're focused on the long-term future of the contract, that might be where you have some issue, because you're talking about a guy who, by the time that contract really reaches the finish line, is well into his 30s at this point. What kind of player is he going to be then? If you were focused on the here and now of what he provides, he's giving you exactly what you expect every single time out. He had a 4-point game against Carolina, factored into every goal they scored 2 of them himself. He's up to 7 goals on the season. We're not even a quarter of the way through the season. He's on pace for another 30-goal season. And the fact that he's able to do that without the level of talent that a lot of other teams have, that tells you he's a good enough player to be part of your top 6 moving forward. But for how long? And as long as you're missing all of the other key pieces, you don't have a true number 1 center, you don't have a number 1 defenseman, you're really in limbo with the goaltending situation. As long as those things are going on, is it the most valuable investment for the future of the franchise? Maybe in the here and now, you know what you're going to get, and you're going to continue to get it, and that's going to be great. But it's the long term, I think, that people have a problem with. Konechny's one of the few guys who you look at and you go, he's not the one who's not performing up to the standard. He's not the one who does, it feels like, isn't giving you exactly what you expect. You're looking at other guys, Joel Farabee, Tyson Forster, Morgan Frost. These are the guys, and you start to look through, and Forster had scored last week against Boston in a win. That was good for him. Joel Farabee got an empty netter there and had played better, but again, it's the totals aren't adding up for him. And then you look at a guy like Morgan Frost, who scored his first goal of the season, kind of in a fluky way of sorts. He whiffed on the shot, it hit off his leg, and still went into the net. He's a player that I think has a critical role in all of this, because time is running out on him to be a solidified member of a core going forward. And he's the type of player right now, like, the reason why I say he's such a critical part is because, one, the offense needs to start coming with consistency for him to prove that he belongs in a core anyway. And then two is just that you're so thin at center as a team that he has to be part of it. Like, you saw at one point in time, John Tortorella had a recent press conference where he was asked about Morgan Frost, and kind of, you could hear it with the tone of voice that, like, yeah, it's got to pick up. And it sounded very much like the type of tone you would hear from John Tortorella before a guy gets benched. And I look at that situation and I really wonder, how close is that to really happening? When you think about all the other things going on, you sent Jet Lachenko back to juniors. Now Ryan Paling's on the shelf with an injury. It's like, okay, there's enough going on at the center position now that you've changed over the last several weeks that Frost may just have to play so you have centers, whether you like his performance or not. But it's not going to necessarily look, I don't think that's the way it's going to be, because that's not how I know John Tortorella to act. But I'm starting to wonder a lot about his future. And he's a guy who's up, his contract is up at the end of the season. His future is very much on the line. And through 13 games, as we start to approach 1 month in the books, you get towards that Thanksgiving mark that we talk about so much. He's a guy that I wonder, are we just seeing the best that Morgan Frost can offer? Is once again, as he comes out of the gate slow. He's not a consistent point producer. Is this the best that we're going to see from Morgan Frost for his career? Is this just who he is? And if that's the case, I don't know that he has a long-term place in this picture. It's really interesting. And I hate to pile on the forwards like that for the lack of scoring. It's one of the most glaring parts of the team, obviously. I think it's interesting how that's the glaring part, and then it's almost like complete role reversal. The offense gets going, maybe fortunately, by getting goals on, so many goals on so few shots, but it seems like the game where they finally get that total. Oh, look, they scored 4 goals in a game against the Carolina Hurricanes, who were rolling coming into that game, and they give up 6. Now, the last one's an empty netter, so it's more or less it was 5 goals given up, but you see what happens over the course of a game. And they didn't give up an abundance of shots to the point where it was some absolutely crazy lopsided number. It wasn't upwards of near 50 shots and them taking 12 per se, but it's a big disparity. And it's really a cause for concern that they can't seem to generate anything in terms of offensive shots on goal, offensive traffic, offensive puck possession, forechecking. It's all lacking. And really, that was the thing that the team was able to hang their hat on, was they scored in transition a lot last year, and they were able to start to forecheck to create some chances and to create some possession time. They had their fair share of possession. They averaged 33 shots per game last season. That's down now probably close to 8 shots per game. That's just an insane number to take that gap, to go from 33 to 25 per game, and really watch it dwindle even further over the last several games. Like, we're talking 16 last night, maybe even more so than 16. It's 2 periods back to back where they had 3 shots on goal for the period. And ironically enough, they scored on one of them in the second and 2 more in the third. So they actually scored on 3 of the 6 shots. But that doesn't solve your problems any. That's not going to help you win games if that's where your mind is at. I keep going back to Tuesday's game as it was really the perfect tank but don't tank game for like the people who are on the tanking side of things. You're a team that's toward the bottom of the standings right now. Losses probably help your cause more than they don't, right? You didn't lose the game by being non-competitive. You stayed in a game with the Carolina Hurricanes, a team that a lot of people have definitely in playoffs. A lot of people would probably have being a team that could make a playoff run, probably would consider them in the contender tier. They took that team to the final 30 seconds before giving up the game-winning goal. But when you really start to break it down and you start to look at the possession and you start to look at the shot disparity, you really start to see the flaws that continue to come through. And even down to, John Tortorella talks about momentums in game a lot. Right after you get yourself, whether I saw it a couple different times in different ways. Carolina scores a goal and then they immediately score another one in the second period. Takes a 1-1 game to a 3-1 game in less than a minute. That's a big momentum swing. It can be. And then I saw it again with the Flyers tie the game in the third period. Carolina comes back, gets the goal right back. It's back to being 4-3. You're down a goal again. Recognizing those momentums is big. That was also what Carolina was destined to do in this game, strictly because of how they play. That is a puck possession team. The Flyers are not a puck possession team. It's going to lead to that style of game, and it's going to lead to that kind of result ultimately. So, and all this to say, before we ever even get into defensive coverages, the Flyers had Igor Zamula back out there on the ice on Tuesday. He was on the ice for, you think about the goal against, he's following a play behind the net. The front of the net's left uncovered. Someone's missing from their position. It's a breakdown. It's a complete textbook breakdown. And that turns into a situation where he's on the ice for another goal against. We've seen Jamie Drysdale have his struggles. We've seen some games, and it's not happening as frequently as some of the other guys, but we've seen games where Travis Sanheim's like that. There's been games where Rasmus Ristolainen's like that. Really, your 2 most consistent defensemen are Cam York and Nick Seeler. And both have missed time with injury, which hurts your team's performance in the process. This was not, and I thought Emil Andre had played well since the call up, but last night, that's not a good performance. It is not a game that you can sit there and put much positive spin on from his perspective. And I just start to look at, for everybody who's going to talk about the goaltending, for everybody who's going to look at the goaltending situation, Alexei Kolosov getting starts now, pretty regularly, Ivan Fedotov kind of being in limbo at this point because he hasn't performed well. I can look at all of those things, and as much as I understand you can't ignore the goaltending problem. It's a problem. They haven't won a game with a backup goaltender in net since March 2nd of last season. They've gone, I believe the number is 8 starts, and that's only 8 because they basically toward the end of the year had to refuse to give anybody else starts, and Sam Ersson was the guy, and Ersson was losing games too at that point. I just get the sense that even though this is a disastrous position for the Flyers at this point, whether or not it's because I keep looking at the fact that they have 2 19-year-old prospects in goal that could make noise, and it's kind of like your future is more established than your present probably. And Kolosov's raw. He's a guy who's got to figure some stuff out, and you've got to give him the time to experiment and see if he's capable of it. He's looked better than Fedotov. I'll give him that. And you can look at all those things. Maybe it's because they have those 2 kids at 19 years old that established their future. Whatever the reason may be, I keep putting less on the goalies with some of this. They definitely have shots they need to stop. Kolosov had one in this game. I think it was the second goal. It was Eric Robinson's goal. It goes off of him. He needs to make a save. We've seen it with Ivan Fedotov. We've seen it a couple of times with Sam Ersson. The fact of the matter is, though, too, is that even for all of those goals that you can sit there and go, well, goalie probably should have had it. There's been plenty of times where the goalie has no chance because the defensive breakdowns are that bad. So there's a lot of things coming into play. There's a lot of things that you got to think about with that. And really, I just think right now it's been a team-wide kind of epidemic of sorts of just non-fundamental play, not being able to drive the play, not being able to kind of get out of your own way and manage to make something of some of these games in the early going. They've had their share of games that have just been relatively forgetful, and that's forgettable, and that's a problem, especially when you have Matvei Michkov on the team now, when you have something that should make people want to tune in. It's starting to shift to the thing that you want to tune in for is to see if they keep losing, because if you're big on the draft and you really think, it's a center, it's potentially a top prospect center heavy draft in 2025. And the Flyers not only have a pick that now could be trending towards being very high in the draft, they have 2 others in the first round and they have 3 in the second round. And you start to think about all the possibilities about what you could come away from, this draft with and what it could do for your future. But you also have to factor in all of the things you've done between drafting Matvei Michkov, the season that you had last year, and where you are now. And you're going to have to really look hard at the decisions you've already made and the ones that you're going to make in the future, because you have to live with the ones you've already made or live with the ones that the GM before made that go into this. Or you can also, you want to try to clean up the mess as much as possible. And sometimes that might just be by doing what the Flyers had to do in this situation. Run it back, same team for the most part. Michkov's really the only newcomer other than the goalies at this point. And the results are what they are. But maybe you have to, maybe you just have to figure out a way to, you got to find a way to trudge forward here a little bit. Like, it's going to be a long season if this is what it's going to be. And as much as you could sit there and try to tease it as, well, tune in because you want to make sure that they keep that lottery position up, it still doesn't help you moving forward. So, there's a lot going on around this team right now. I think they were graced last year by having a decent start. They lost to San Jose to actually go to 5-7-1. So they were very close to similar records at the same time last season, but they were able to reel off a winning streak and give you that confidence. Like, yeah, we can be here. We can hang in this picture, and then did for pretty much the rest of the season on until those last handful of games. They're not even going to sniff it this year if this is what you're going to get. And the fact that you have 2 games coming up against the 2 teams in Florida that sure know what they're doing with the puck and have the ability to probably skate circles around you with their forechecking cycle game, shot attempts. That's what's going to keep this thing going right now. If they're going to figure this thing out, they're going to have to figure out how to have the puck more often. And that's going to be a tough task against these next 2 teams. So with that, I think we're going to leave it there. Flyers have 2 more games coming up before the weekend. They play the Tampa Bay Lightning on Thursday night, 7 p.m. Florida Panthers on Saturday at 6 p.m. Different start time there. Flyers are back on home ice on Monday night to take on the San Jose Sharks. We'll probably be back with you with a new episode after that game. So 3 more on tap for you before we come back with a new episode of Flyers Files. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and listening today and listening this week. Be sure to follow 97.3 ESPN on all platforms, Instagram, Twitter, X, and get all of your Flyers news and coverage from me there. And yeah, so with that, we will see you next on 97.3 ESPN.